fascinating. So here we are, we're at age 20 or something, and we have some ideas and the way that we're going to store them is with a kind of a sticky place, Velcro in the mind. And for some boys that are coming from wealthy communities, they don't even need the sticky place because valves and compression rings and engines is part of their heritage. And if they were really from an upper class place, then they know about Holley 4-barrel carburetors and kinds of things which probably have no significance now that we have fuel injection. Some kind of topics don't need the same kind of hooks. They, for example, if you come to appreciate this Beethoven variation like I do, you would like to have that hooked in somehow. And there's some other kinds of hooks that you need for storing stuff that I guarantee you will need at some point, this Maxwell's equations. And we need thousands of hooks. So you're going to catch each day some new idea. It's going to stick in. It won't be integrated. And that's the reason that you're offered to have holidays or walks in the forest or however it is going to work out in your life as a time of reflection and thinking, getting all these things put together. So this innovation and creativity then is what the objective of this power plant is. And what does it consist of? Well, it consists of certainly observing what there is and questioning what there is. Maybe it should be done a different way, I don't know. But let's look and see how it's done. We need networking and we need experimenting. And that's kind of action, and any of us can take those actions. What is special is association. It's taking stuff which is on completely different parts of the universe, an idea from this or another place, have no connection with each other, but when you put them together, all of a sudden you realize, and the world realizes, oh, this is really meant to be that way. Now, I can speak this kind of way as a person that's had this experience. I don't know that you can design to do that, to make something incredibly powerful out of two things which were sort of known to everybody. But when you connect them together in a new way, it's really powerful. That's where this innovator's business comes out of. And my understanding of this is in debt to discussions with my wife Lindy a lot about it. And now some other people have caught on to these ideas, have a course even at Stanford about it. So what I'd like to tell you about now is, okay, here's how I think of myself now that I'm 70-something. Actually, I've been playing in lasers for 50 years, the same as this university's time. So it's a long time, but I've really had fun. In this time, there's a bunch of things that have come, and the list is vastly bigger. I can't possibly talk about how many things would be interesting to talk about, but I should talk about the responsibility that I have of people who have made it possible and funded it. So what my technical talk is about is optical frequency combs. And it's so incredible that I can have 1 million lasers with properties better than we used to be able to have a single laser. It took a long time to get that, and during that time this guy Hall has been replaced by a young guy filled with fire, Junyi. He came out of China at a propitious time, I think it was 1989, when people who had strong opinions and had marched around would have a better future if they lived in a different country. The funding has been by some national agencies in the United States. And another topic which has helped me grow up a little bit is evolution. Here's a building with a few floors, and you see it here as it stands a few years ago. And you can see a few people here that are Lindy's and my kids now, when I was actually past 50. What I'd like to talk to you about is that in this brand new building, we were 12 people, and we joined with 4 people from the University of Colorado to make a new institute. It never had a federal government plus state government collaboration before in the U.S. And there was a lot of reasons that it was impossible to do, and there was a lot of worry about how to make it work. And so we learned how to cooperate, and we can work with each other's strengths. As you know, in most universities, when Professor A gets a new lab, that's at the consequence that Professor B got a little less space. So universities tend to have this kind of activity between the staffs. In this place, we're trying to work together, and I don't need to learn about integrated circuits or vacuum or glasswork or something because another colleague is doing it. So if we have N workers, we have a growth power which has a term like N squared. That's hugely important, and I can explain that to you in a very simple way. We have 24 people who have been fellows of JILA. 3 of them have gotten Nobel Prizes. Now, is that random or what? I can't believe it. So it's possible that this system has some meaning. Well, in detail, we're going to talk about length. Length is something known to you if you have certain kind of training, because Noah had to lay out his boat in terms of cubits that Cleopatra had defined a few centuries before. And length was not a very easy to use concept, because every time the king changed, the length from his elbow to his fingertips changed. And eventually, after the French Revolution, there was a decision to make standard length, and then that's been improved technically, and I'll say a couple of things about that. So here's a picture of that standard length. It's 1 meter bar, and I was part of the team that helped to retire this. And what's happening now is that this 1 kilogram, that is the 1 kilogram that defines what kilogram means. And there's a big effort, a worldwide effort, to try to make this go away by the same kind of technique, to use new technical methods. Okay, so 1960, I was just finishing my thesis. 2 years before, there'd been a fantastic book put out by, article actually, Charles Townes and his brother-in-law, Arthur Shallow, both of whom would win the Nobel Prize a little bit later. And they suggested the possibility to build a system that was like an electronic oscillator. You'd provide gain and feedback, and it would be an oscillator and give out waves. But these waves would be in the optical region. And that was done first in California by Ted Maiman. It was a pulse laser. And it was done in December by Bell Labs group. And I didn't initially learn about this because Lindy and I received our first child 6 days before this paper came out. So I got caught up a little bit later, though. If you have a pulse laser, what you can talk about is high power, and that leads to nonlinear effects. If you have continuous laser, you can talk about stability, and you can talk about super sensitivity, because it's always running and we can figure out how to make the noise go away. So this is really the starting in 1960, maybe 1 year before our university here, of this laser epoch. Now, at that time, it sounded completely reasonable. So here's one of the ideas which is obvious to every person and is wrong. And it took us 40 years to get it clear. I told you that we had pulse lasers, and you can understand it's a pulse. It's 1 pulse, and then you wait a minute, and it's another pulse. Or if you talk about these big lasers that are done in some national laboratories, they make 1,000 joules, and now they even make 1,000,000 joules, and you wait a week or a month before you can do it again. These other lasers are ones that are always running, and they make a continuous beam like this device does. And it's obvious that there's an impenetrable barrier between these. Are different cats. And please notice year 2000. That's going to separate this false reality from how it actually is. So my first contribution to this game was to find a way to get these super narrow resonances. If you have a discharge lamp or a laser itself, here's how it can tune. Doesn't matter what the scale is. What you should see is that these are strong and narrow. And with that, you're going to be able to stabilize laser, and that's going to be something really interesting. You could even call it a new wavelength standard. So here, we need to make comparison with what did exist. So we have this Krypton reference, And this system is optimized for it. You can see that there's plenty of noise. Here's our new system the very first time it's tried, and it gives a resonance which is obviously easier to measure. So here's a factor of 1,000 or something, just bang, on the first try. And that's the role of new technology coming into a field which has sort of come to the end of its game. Nevertheless, it could reach 10 to the minus 9. Now that was a wavelength, but actually we know that wavelength and frequency are connected. That's the speed of light. So we have to know what that wavelength is in frequency units. So where do we start? We have to start with this frequency of 9 billion cycles. Actually, it's 919-263-1770. It's just like a telephone number. It doesn't dial anything now, but it used to be fun to dial it. They've reached a wrong, not a working number. This way. And where are we heading? Well, we're going to have a new standard, and let me just pick one arbitrarily. Its frequency is much higher. It's, we say, 1 petahertz, 1 times 10 to the 15th hertz, or 1,000 trillion oscillations in 1 second. Well, that's pretty fast, and consequently it's hard to measure, and consequently no rational person would begin to think about this, because the factor is 115,000, and how are we ever going to do that? So clearly a new idea is needed, but we don't have the new ideas, so we need to get some results. So how do we do it? Well, we have a crystal, and we can put in a wavelength or frequency, and the crystal is a little tiny bit nonlinear, and so it makes 2 times that frequency. And then we can do 2 times again. And on the left-hand side of this graph, you can see this marching up in a way. So equal distance is equal factors. So we start in some radio frequency range, and we go up, and finally where we want to end up is in some wavelength that you can see, because that's how this is going to be valuable. You have to change technology a few times going along. Each one of these lasers has its own kind of challenges, and that's going to be hard. And the nonlinear things are not so easy to handle either. Nevertheless, in 1996, a German team built up a system. It has 23 stabilized oscillators in it. It has 5 people working continuously, and they have 15 years in it. It's in 3 huge big labs in 2 buildings connected by underground fibers. It's a major undertaking, and they did get a result. They could measure a red stabilized laser against the primary standard. So we did it not the best, we did it the first. So here is 1972 in Boulder, and 2 of my pals with these lasers, and each one is related by factor 2, and so some nonlinear connection, we can lock them all together. That's how I contributed in that. My special business was, I just love electronics, so I figured out how to make these waves have a phase-locked relationship with them. So that led then to the redefinition of the international meter. We had the speed of light then was finally measured by a whole bunch of labs using this kind of technology. And I don't know if the papers have been passed out yet, but there's going to be a quiz to check you on the way out. The number is 299,792,458 meters per second exactly. That's what defines the speed of light. And what it represents is basically a demotion of one of these base standards. We used to have mass and temperature and length, but now all of a sudden length has gone away. It's a derived thing. So that gets one into an absolutely fascinating issue of how many units do you need to discuss in order to have the measurements, so that scientists in Greece and the scientists in Boulder can make their measurements, compare them to the references, and find out if they get the same answers. Because some of the most interesting questions now, I'll come to in a moment, is whether the universe is homogeneous. Are these numbers different in different places? So we'll go quickly through this, but eventually there was a whole bunch of these stable lasers formed, and there was some new idea formed, which came in more or less under the radar because it's teaching something which is not intuitively obvious. And here's a place where the educators have a responsibility. in order to make things clear, we try to simplify it. And we teach a person that if you have a waveform and it has some kind of a width in time, then if that would be narrow, then the width in frequency would be broad. And so that's what everybody learns. They walk away and that's stored in their mind. We never had the imagination to think what would happen if we had a whole bunch of these pulses coming. So here is a whole bunch of these pulses coming. They're absolutely regularly spaced, and that profoundly changes things, because if you look for what the frequency is, it's looking at all of these pulses at one time. This is time and this is frequency. These are Fourier duals. So there's a transformation between these, but in the lab it means this number of pulses came in, and then this is the spectrum that it had. So it has this comb spectrum, line by line by line. So this is where I go from having pulses that are known in time to having pulses that are known in frequency. It's not magic, it's simply mathematics. But nobody knew that before, didn't use it. Here's this guy, Chebetaev. He's my counterpart, where he worked absolutely parallel, same kind of subject, publication, next one. 3 years is the translation time delay. So it's very interesting to see that nature told us individually what was the right thing, and we started doing those independently.